Hello, we're Natalie and Abby, and you are listening to The Sensational Life with Bibic.
Join us to explore the many layers of life through unique and inspiring topics each week. Whether you're looking to better support yourself or others, we're here to provide insights, practical tips, and meaningful conversations.
Bibic is a national charity dedicated to empowering children and young adults with brain injuries, disabilities, and neurological or developmental challenges. We're both part of a fantastic team of developmental therapists. While our title might sound a bit fancy, it really just means that we're here to support children, young adults, and families with helpful strategies for any challenges that they encounter.
There may be times we cover some difficult topics during this podcast, but we will always give you prior warning of this. We'll have some wonderful guest speakers joining us, and we can't wait to hear from you with all your questions and your own stories. Together, we can create a more inclusive and understanding world, one episode at a time. Hello and welcome back to our second episode of our The Sensational Life with Bibic podcast. We hope that you enjoyed our first episode. This episode we're going to dive into more around emotional control. So as you know, our last episode we kind of started hinting on it a little bit, didn't we? But yeah, we're going to try and go a little bit more in depth this time.
Yeah, so last week we introduced the term executive functioning. Just to remind you all, it's about that in the moment thinking. Executive functioning lives in the frontal part of your brain, and it's in control of planning, prioritizing, impulse control, working memory, emotional control, flexible thinking, all sorts of things. And like Nat said, today we're going to be focusing on that emotional control side of things. So, what is emotional control? We use it all the time. So when we're reacting to what people are saying to us, we're thinking about what sort of emotion to use, what tone to use. We see kind of like a lot of difficulties with emotional control when we see children come into the centre, and this could be because they've been overwhelmed by a situation, and then the executive functioning goes offline, and then just a front running emotion comes out. So last week I said that I cry a lot. We do see a lot of anger.
I feel like I should give an insight.
Yeah,
I
okay,
cry
thanks.
too.
Okay, Nat cries as well. I'm not the only one. But we can also see a lot of anger that comes out as well. Or you could see like the laughter side of things that kind of comes from that fight, flight, freeze kind of element. They don't really know how to respond. So laughter comes out because the executive functioning goes offline.
I think last time we said, wasn't it, sometimes laughter can come out from that awkwardness. Because laughter, you fill the gap with laughter and then awkward.
Yeah, I've seen a few parents that have come in and they go, why do they smile when I'm telling them off?
Yeah.
And they're not doing it to deliberately wind you up, even though inside you are seething because they are smiling. And that's a way of you using your emotional control. When you don't react to that situation, your executive functioning is kicking in and going, okay, so I can't get cross with them because they don't mean to be smiling at me at this point. And your executive function is controlling your reactions to that situation. We see as well, if we go back to neurodiversities, planning and prioritizing can be really key. So particularly, traditionally with that autism side of things, they like to stick to a rigid routine so that they know what is happening each and every day.
Familiarity.
So because that executive functioning that they struggle with by keeping it nice and rigid for them and that familiarity, it means that they can predict what's coming up, because without planning, you can't predict what's going to happen. And when there's changes that happen to that routine that is outside of their control, we can often see that this executive functioning goes offline. So it goes back to that Dan Siegel with the flipping the lid scenario.
Yeah, the ham model of the brain.
ham model of the brain, yeah, where that logical thought and reasoning goes offline, and then you're left with that emotional dysregulation.
I always think as well, emotions can be quite complex as well, and I think there is always quite a lot of there's a lot of emotions. You could be angry, but there's also sort of frustrated, and there's so many different words used for emotions as well. And I think sometimes this is why it can be even more a complex subject, because it's those understanding of what those emotions mean and how they feel. So we dived a little bit to start with in episode 1 around sensory processing, and Abby helped me remember our traditional five senses, including sort of that interoception. And now your interoception is what's in control of your body's internal senses. So if you think, it's usually sort of hunger, thirst, but it also is heavily linked to your emotions. So going into sort of crying, for example, you feel cry when you are about to cry, you kind of sort of feel it in your throat a little
Yeah.
bit, don't you? Same with anger or butterflies and things like that. So sometimes emotional control can be very complicated because we often link to those traditional really impactful emotions, which is anger, excitement, happy,
Yeah.
where actually there may be more to it. So I did work with a young girl that got confused between anxiety and excitement because it meant she had
It gives you that same bubbly feeling, doesn't
yeah,
it? Yeah.
yeah.
And I think identifying those emotions and what they are feeling can cause a lot of confusion for them, because we think about kind of like, well, we talked about the main five of senses as well, but you go happy, sad, angry,
Mm,
excited. Those are kind of like the first emotions that people feel.
mm,
And you often hear children go, well, I'm angry. And actually, if you delve a bit deeper,
mm,
it's not that anger. It could be you're quite irritated by something,
mm.
or actually, I'm feeling frustrated because I can't complete whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, and from the executive function point of view as well. So a lot of the time you see anxiety and worry. Now, that sort of emotion can also funnel into the executive functioning. So again, going into how we were talking last week about sort of task initiation, you think if you're an individual that struggles with these elements, so planning and prioritizing, actually that can stimulate an emotional response because actually it can cause worry because if I asked you, Abby, do you want to go out for a walk with me? You'd be like, yeah, no problem, Natalie. Let's just go down the road.
It's because my executive function is kicking in, going, oh well, I know actually that Natalie has to go somewhere in about an hour's time, so it's not going to be a terribly long walk. It's quite cold, so I'm going to take my coat. We're probably just going to walk around the block and come back. Whereas someone who's got difficulties with that prediction and the planning and the prioritizing, you may as well be asking them to go and climb Kilimanjaro. Like,
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
like they logically, outside of the moment, they know that that's
Mm,
not what you're asking them to do. But in that moment, they go, well, how long are we going to be out for? How long am I going to walk? Do I need, what sort of shoes do I need? Do I need my coat? Do I need to take a snack? How long are we going to be out for? Actually, I wanted to go and play on my Xbox this afternoon. Am I going to be able to do that?
mhm.
And it's just that ability to think through in the moment what is going to happen and what's needed.
And we often find the immediate response is a demand avoidant. You get
Yeah.
demand avoidance, which is the immediate no, because the easiest way to stop something from happening is refuse to do it. Because if I can't plan and organise to
Hmm.
do it, or if I can't predict, I am not going to do it. And therefore, I'm going into the fight, flight,
Yeah.
freeze, fawn and protecting myself because I'm actually not stepping into somewhere where I feel vulnerable and
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
And we talk to parents a lot about this. So we see a lot of parents that come in and go, I think they might have PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance, or, oppositional defiant disorder.
Yeah, so ODD. Yeah.
Yeah. And it often stems, like Nat said, from the anxiety around things, because this executive function doesn't kick in. They can't plan, they can't predict. Like Nat said, the easiest option is to say no,
Mm.
because inside they can't explain why they
Mm.
might be feeling like that, because they can't identify that emotion, and they go into that protective mode.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing to say actually, because we always talk about sort of executive function, emotion control, sensory system, but actually for our young individuals, they don't have that awareness. So they don't have that awareness of that their brain is struggling with their
No.
executive functioning or they're going into fight, flight, freeze. Whereas adults, we may be able to analyze and unpick behaviors and use things like your ABC sort of
Oh, yeah,
checklist.
it's the chart. So you look at the what happens before, what the behavior might be, and then what the consequence would
Yeah.
be. So you look to see if there's a pattern of behavior. So like that said, we can delve a bit deeper and see if there is a recurring pattern behind why these behaviors are happening.
Yeah, whereas for our young individuals, they don't have that. They're
No,
not going to do that. You think
no.
also they don't have that awareness. The way that their body is working is having an event, feeling a sensation or a feeling, and responding and reacting to that. And often we find with the things that we're recommending with strategies and things like that tends to be around teaching them the more appropriate reaction. So we're not ever trying to stop them from how they react. So say for example you have an individual that does lash out. Yes, the lash out is what we call the inappropriate behavior, but we're never talking about behaviors in terms of they're good or bad. We're just talking about them in terms of what's inappropriate and appropriate. So if they're an individual that lashes out, are they seeking it from a proprioceptive point of view? And are we therefore redirecting for them to use things like smashing ice cubes, punching bags, and things like that? Obviously, again, in the moment, you can't necessarily guide them to that, but the work that we do around that.
It's trying to be proactive rather than reactive. So by looking into the underlying behaviours and what might be causing them, like Nat said, with the sensory side of things, we'll be proactive and we'll regulate that proprioceptive sense. Whereas if it's an emotional control thing and they're becoming quite angry,
Mm.
okay, so what can we do to support them? We can see that they're starting to get irritated, they're starting to work themselves up. What can we do to help de-escalate this situation? I mean, we've got a really lovely handout. It's a nice visual handout, which we will. I believe it is on the Bibic website for
Yeah.
the under the resources. It's called the arc of a meltdown, and it's a bell curve. So imagine like a hill, if you will. We all start at the bottom of the hill, where everything is fine, and then we get to start to move on up the hill, and this is where something will trigger us. Now, this could be something outside of their control that's an immediate trigger.
Mhm.
It could be, linking back to the sensory side of things, it could be a build-up of sensory things and
Yeah.
they get triggered. When you get to the top of the hill, the arc of the meltdown, this is where that executive functioning goes completely offline and that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode comes in.
I think people often word it as like seeing red.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, the red mist descends.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah. And at this point, there's absolutely 0 point talking to anyone at this
Mm.
point because they can't have that logical thought and reasoning. They haven't got the ability to hear what you are saying. And eventually they will begin to de-escalate and that executive function does kick in. And this is often where we speak to parents about doing that co-regulation to help support, bring them back down to the bottom of the hill, the other side, the bottom of the bell curve, where they can return to that baseline state. But I think it's really important to note, I don't know whether you say as well, Nat, but like at this point, when they've gone through that complete emotional turmoil, they're going to be exhausted.
Yeah.
They might not even want to talk about what's happened, might not even have the realization kind of that it's
Mm.
happened, because like everything's gone offline.
You often get those that are quite remorseful afterwards, don't you? That
Yeah.
there's an element of embarrassment, and sometimes that they don't even want to talk about the situations that happened or even the emotion, because that often triggers sort of looking back at what happened and things like that, where actually if you think when they're at the top of that bell curve,
Hmm.
they're in that state of complete red mist, they have no plan in organising, and they may seek out to do things like destroy things and break things or lash out. And actually for them as an individual, a lot of the time your children are, or young adults or young people are, really kind, really considerate, and
Absolutely.
actually they don't want to do this. I know if I've had situations where I've said something that I really didn't mean, but
Mm.
in that top of the moment you lash out. And I think sometimes that's the bit, because also the other part of it is as they come down that bell curve,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't get the full regulation back before they're into another event. So this is where you get a lot of that spiking, where you think we had a trouble in the morning, let's do some regulation, but again 2 hours later we're back up with another meltdown, because
Absolutely.
actually they haven't had the opportunity to completely regulate and then work through
Yeah.
the
And the
emotion.
arc of a meltdown is different for everyone. So
Mm.
some people and children, they can be at the peak and down to baseline within 10 minutes. Other children and people, it can take hours. I've known someone to take a whole day to kind
Mm.
of come back down. So like Nat was saying, if something's happened in the morning, they've peaked, you think, okay, well, they're calm, we're going to send them to school, it's fine. And then they come home from school and they're immediately kind of like back up to the top and you go, what on earth has happened?
Mm.
But it's just because they haven't regulated themselves
Mm.
completely back down to that base level, and they can quite easily go back up into that offline executive function offline mode.
Yeah, and I think again we keep sort of doing these crossovers between everything. So again, darting back into your sensory processing, we often talk about calm and alerting from a proprioceptive vestibular state, because again, just quickly, because I don't think we said last episode, so your proprioceptor being in your joints and muscles and what's in charge of calming your body, and your vestibular being linked to your inner ear, and it's basically what's in charge of alerting your body. So again, in another series we'll go a little bit deeper into that, but we usually use your proprioceptor vestibular try and regulate the body and the brain as well. So it might even be at those points when you're coming down the sort of arc of a meltdown, you look at getting them doing things like going out on the trampoline. You really think about that proprioceptive vestibular before you even touch on the emotions to ensure that they are then trying to
Yeah,
regulate and come
absolutely.
back round. But yeah, again, it's all these things that keep correlating and overlapping is how your emotions link to your sensory list, your executive functioning, and then that comes back round to your emotions. And these are the things that can complicate things. And I think I
Absolutely.
always use the term muddy the water.
Yeah, yeah. So it'd be really lovely if it was very simple. It'd be like, this
Mm.
is executive functioning and this is the
Yeah.
sensory, but it is just very intermingled
Mm.
and everything. And there's lots of things that you can do to support this emotional regulation. Like I said, we try and be proactive as much as we can. Obviously, we do see a lot of families that come in, and at the moment, it seems to be reactive
Mhm.
because they're not quite sure where the trigger comes from, and they're not quite sure, kind of how to manage that emotion for that child. So Nat talked briefly about appropriate release of frustration. So when that anger is coming out, often having that physical release of that emotion is what that individual needs. So rather than throwing things that you don't want them to do, or maybe even hitting and lashing out at yourselves, we talk about getting some ice cubes and smashing them on the ground outside, getting some pillows so that they can punch the pillows. Even a punch bag for those older ones is going to be really good release of that frustration. Cardboard is a really good one, ripping up the cardboard and jumping up and down on the recycling. It's all going to get that emotional release out to help them regulate.
And with this one as well, like I said last week, sometimes it's hard in that moment when the lid is flipped and you have that raw emotion to get the individual to do these activities. So we often focus on the before and after. So before, if you're able to see sort of potential triggers or potential things that do may lead to sort of overwhelm, you can potentially catch it at that point and encourage the individual to go do an appropriate release of frustration. But a lot of the times you will find after the event is the easiest way to sort of aid in regulation. Now, when we touch a little bit on demand avoidance as well, you will find in terms of language that if you then tell your young individual to go out in the garden and smash some ice cubes,
No.
you're probably going to get a lot of pushback. So with this, we tend to say make it a family event. So is it actually the first step of in using an appropriate release of frustration in your household is that you as parents just model that to your young individual. So is it actually you're the ones that say, oh, I've had a really hard day at work, or oh, I just trapped my finger in the door, or oh, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling happy, or any emotion that you think your young person will relate to, and you go, do you want to come with me into the garden and smash some ice cubes? So using it at those times where you have full regulation is better than trying to get them in the moment. Then you can kind of work back from that way.
Yeah,
So
you bring
then
it back from that point, don't you?
yeah, so getting the whole family involved and the siblings involved. And then also when you're in an emotion, so you're not at the top seeing red, but you're actually more at that point where there is sort of more reasoning to them. You sort of use language as such as, I saw that you got really angry earlier. Do you want to come with me in the garden and we're going to do some smashing ice cubes? So making it more of a family thing.
I think it's also really important to note how you are feeling within yourself. So when you are beginning to feel like that overwhelm, talk about it with your family and be like, okay, so I'm beginning to feel really frustrated. I can feel it kind of in my chest and it's bubbling up into my head and things like that, so that they can begin to identify those emotions within themselves. Um, we often use visual prompts for children as well to help them support recognizing those emotions within themselves. Like at the beginning of this podcast, we spoke about only recognizing anger or happy or sad. And we've got a really lovely visual prompt, and you could make one yourselves called the mood meter, which gives you a whole range of emotions, whether they're positive or negative, whether they're big feelings or whether they're smaller feelings, and it gives you those verbal cues for
Mm.
the children to identify what they might be feeling within themselves.
Yeah.
Um, there's a really lovely handout called "How are you feeling today?" which is quite a good check-in with them. And it doesn't label the emotion, but it does give you a really good insight into how they might be feeling.
Mm.
So you look at what color it might be, whether it's red, purple, green, whether it's a big feeling, whether it's a little feeling,
Mm.
where they're feeling it within their bodies. And then also, if you could touch this feeling, which I quite like,
Mm.
what would it feel like? So is it a spiky feeling? Is it a swirly feeling? And then anything else that they might want to say about how they're feeling. And although it doesn't give you that, this is how I'm feeling irritated,
Mm.
it does give you a really good insight into kind of whether it's a positive feeling, whether it's a negative feeling, and then what you can do to support it.
And I think also, again, going back to how this connects sort of to executive functioning side of things, I think if we spoke briefly last time about how sort of, I don't know, task initiation and things like that actually let sort of starting each part of the task for them. So putting their bricks away in the box and things like that can initiate the task. If you think with emotions, starting the conversation with a physical like a representation of the
Yeah.
emotion sometimes can trigger into sort of what that feeling can then escalate into, and so on and so forth. So I think sometimes that can be actually quite a positive way to do it, is going more the physical, because I know I'm a person, especially with my executive functioning, out of sight, out of mind, which is quite a common
Yeah.
thing. And I think if you take that mindset when it comes to emotions, actually, because they're out of sight and we can't see them, they're out of mind. Whereas actually, if you can take a more physical response, so when I get angry, I clench my fists and so on and so forth, can be really supportive. The other thing that is worth sort of touching on, and I know a lot of people recommend it, but it's mindfulness. Now, mindfulness, from a mindfulness meditation aspect, can be really good for the mind in terms of slowing us down. But actually, from an emotional control, executive functioning, flipping the lid perspective, we often recommend five senses mindfulness, because what you are attempting to do is delay the brain just before it's about to flip its lid. So have you got an individual that does become quite worried before they go into a
Like an unknown
yeah,
situation,
like a
or yeah.
club or something like that, or before you enter a shopping centre? Or have you got a person that's worried about what's potentially coming and they are questioning and asking lots? And yes, definitely answer those questions. And I'm not saying to deflect, but having a point between sort of answering the questions and just doing five senses. So five things I can see, four things I can hear, four things I can touch, three things I can hear, two things I can smell, and then one thing I can
It's
taste.
appropriate.
And it just really is trying to get them to have that point to pause before they do their lid flips. So with this as well, you have to really ensure you can't just go five things I can see. I can see a chair, I can see a table. It has to be, I can see a chair. It looks like it's made of wood. The wood looks like it's rough. It looks like it would be comfortable. So really try and get them to explain that. On a positive side, it does also aid with word finding, because you think it's really getting them
Yeah.
to describe and things like that. But it's just allowing them that point to pause.
Yeah, it just takes them out of that moment,
Mm.
doesn't it? And gets them that executive functioning to kind of stay online rather than get themselves so worked up over the anxiety of, like Nat said, going to a new club or somewhere like that. And it just gives them the chance to regulate before they reach that top of the arc of a
Mm.
meltdown.
You can also, again, with what you said earlier, Abby, with the chart of the mood
Yeah.
meter, you could also do mood music as well. So again, if they're an individual that quite likes music, you can get them to link their emotions to different styles of music. So actually, when they're happy or on the way to school, do you listen to a specific playlist? Or when they're on the way back from school, do you listen to a specific playlist? When they're happy, do you listen to, I don't know, Taylor Swift, because that's really sort of an upbeat and happy song? So it's also maybe looking at it from that side of it. It's like, how can you link these emotions into more physical representations of the emotions to aid them in their understanding of what they feel?
Yeah. Another good thing that you could do for those children who need almost like that visual prompt for them is taking photos of
Mm,
what these emotions might look like. Now, you can find lots of cartoon versions and things online, but it's actually really good if you can get people as photographs, because if you get a cartoon version of happy, you get that great big grin on your face of this is me being happy. And we often get children going, but why aren't you happy? I'm like, well, I am happy, but you're not smiling like
mm,
the cartoon version of smiling because you haven't got that great big grin on your face. This is what's confusing them. So just by having visual images for them of real people showing different emotions, that can help them clue into maybe how they're feeling and
mm.
things, and maybe have a look in the mirror at pulling those sorts of faces. They can begin to recognize how they're feeling within themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something you could add on to that is then getting them to put why someone might be happy, because then again, it's linking them into the emotions and how the emotions connected to events and things like that. But I think emotions are very complicated, and they are something that actually for an individual can be quite hard to break down. So if we can do as much as possible to model it, talk about it, show our emotions and be open about talking about emotions, re-guiding those inappropriate reactions to emotions to more appropriate ones, and not focusing on good or bad behavior, just redirecting, I think again you can really start to unpick
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely. But we could be talking about this for hours
Yeah.
on end. We could keep going, but we are trying to keep everything to about 30 minutes for you all. So again, thank you for listening to episode 2 of our podcast. We've really enjoyed talking to you about that emotional control, and we'd love to hear from you again. So if you can think of anything you can do to support yourselves or others, we'll be back next week with
Planning and
oh,
prioritizing.
nice. If you've got any questions or stories you would like to share, head on over to our Facebook or Instagram page. Again, if you just type in Bibic, we should pop up. Alternatively,
You can drop us an email. Our email address is thesensationallife@bibic.org.uk. And you can just drop us an email. We'd really love to hear from you in terms of stories, any questions, because we'd like also, as these podcasts go through and we go through more episodes, maybe having a troubleshooting section or
would love
a
that. Yeah.
story section, or even sort of a we'd just love more.
We just interact with us. We would love it to be just supporting everyone in the best way that we can. So whether that's you sharing your stories, your experiences, whether you know that there's a resource or something that we haven't mentioned that you'd like us to point out to people, because you know that it's a really good resource for people who are struggling with anything,
Mm.
really.
And then finally, please subscribe, leave us a review, leave us 5 stars. We'd really love to hear what you're thinking of the podcast so far. We are only on episode 2, we've got lots in plan as well. So, yeah, keep it sensational.